Hey everyone, it's Hydro Pump here. Today, I wanted to talk about how I discovered Dragon Turbo and let's create the deck and managed to top with it. Um, in the first major online Edison tournament back in 2021. It was actually my first Edison tournament. So yeah, it's kind of crazy to think that it's been that long, but I just wanted to make a video. It's a long time coming. Just like, what was my mindset of making this deck? What was wrong with me? But yeah, I just wanted to kind of just go over things like this I was thinking of, because you look at Dragon Turbo deck lists, like standard ones nowadays, and it just everything kind of just makes sense together. But this is actually my deck list for the tournament I top. It's called Edison Legends back in the day, ran by E3 Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Ed and Edison back in the day. That was the name of their channel beforehand. But yeah, I just kind of want to run through how I created this deck list. Obviously, there's been improvements on the list over the years by different players and myself as well, but because this was literally the first list, I didn't know if this deck was going to be good or functioning, because again, it was my first tournament with this deck, so it was kind of just a really cool experience. But yeah, so you see this deck here. It's relatively standard for the most part. Obviously, you have some cards that are just texts that are out of date, and I'll get into that a little bit. But first of all, when I was creating this deck, I wasn't even sure it was a bunch of different ideas that just kind of meshed together. And I guess just to give some background history on myself on how I build decks. So in the past, I always built decks that had really big engines and everything kind of worked together. Just for example, some decks I played in the past, they had really large engines. I played decks in several different formats. I played decks like Infernity, which is a really big combo deck, requires a really large engine. Dark World, which draws a lot of cards, and everything kind of just has to either work to draw and discard. So that was a really big part of that deck's engine. And I played Shadal, which the whole deck's about fusing your guys off. So you're kind of takes 3 cards usually to make a fusion play. So again, requires a really big engine. So Dragon Turbo, obviously really big engine. Everything's about drawing cards and discarding dragons and all that. So that was kind of right up my alley. It just kind of the kind of decks I work with. I kind of just use using unconventional decks. I was never really one for Summon Shura, set Deep Prison or Bottomless, and just super generic cards. And I always kind of complex decks, combo, and decks that draw a lot, similar to Dark World. I even played Fabled back in the day. That wasn't really a meta deck, but back in when 2011, I played a deck like that, and it was actually kind of similar to Dragon Turbo, where you're just you go Reagan and draw 2 cards, and you go Pie Avarice and shuffle yourself back, and you just keep on spamming synchros and drawing and all that until you get a really big board. So yeah, those kind of decks were always just fun to me. So I kind of take those past decks that I played and try to apply it to the Edison format, because again, I didn't really have I was just testing things out. I had just started Edison format around March or February of 2021, just getting into it. And again, the format was just kind of starting to pick up. There was some players from 2020 that had been playing Edison format, but it kind of just started picking up in 2021 when they had one of their largest tournaments at the time, which I'll jump into in a little bit. But yeah, I just kind of want to give some background info of kind of the decks I played and how I saw this one. Okay, so let's see here. Yeah, so when I was building this deck, there was some key things that I was kind of looking out for. So first of all, I saw like the regular Disaster Dragon deck, and I didn't really like it that much. I thought it was a little too reliant on Future Fusion. Obviously, cards like Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon and Future Fusion are very strong. Quackmere Drago, very strong. But the rest of the deck just kind of ran a bunch of mediocre cards. And again, it wasn't really my style. It just kind of running a bunch of like deep prisons, traps, like generic traps. And until it like kind of just stalled out until you got to the Future Fusion play. So again, I kind of just like, I saw these cards and I was like, okay, these cards are really busted. But you know, let's try to make a different way to play the dragon deck, because that was kind of like the standard dragon deck back then. And something that was another problem with that deck is that it couldn't out a simple dupe block very easily. You needed some kind of, you know, like trap card, like Phoenix Chain, Compulsory, Book of Moon, or you just needed something like that wasn't in the engine to out something simple as a dupe block, which was another big problem, because you know, if you can't out a dupe block in Edison format, like what are you doing? So anyways, so that was like the one thing. That was one thing I saw. I wanted to make a dragon deck that didn't really, that just couldn't, just was easy to deal with like simple things, and just kind of like more of like an engine rather than just like Future Fusion deck. And I was just kind of like exploring different cards. Like I'm sure everyone, when they join a format, they just like kind of just want to, you know, search around and see if they can break the format. Again, it was a little easier back then because Edison was not as looked at, so or not as explored. And something else that I saw was Super Rejuvenation. Again, this card was banned when Dragon Rulers were around, and that deck, you know, just played through Super Rejuve. Obviously, they use it a little differently because, you know, they had the whole Dragon Rulers. There's no Dragon Rulers here, so they played some different cards. And then, so I was like, well, me, I can just like start looking for cards that say, you know, draw and discard dragons. So obviously, you have the White Stone of Legend and Blue Eyes White Dragon, and quite literally, Cards of Constance has White Stone of Legend on there. Discard a Dragon Tuner with 1000 attack or less, draw 2 cards. So bingo, there's your Dragon Tuner with 1000 attack or less, and you happen to go +1 and search Blue Eyes White Dragon, and you know, Blue Eyes White Dragon level 8 works with trade-in. So that's kind of like just like 12 cards in the deck right there. We got 3 White Stone of Legends, 3 Blue Eyes, 3 Cards of Constance, and 3 trade-in. And you know, obviously the draw spells work with Super Rejuvenation because you're discarding dragons. And then, I mean, this is kind of just a common sense. Like this was a thing back, like way back in the day. People were playing Exodia decks, FTK decks with Super Rejuve, so it's not like super foreign or anything. And again, at this point, I wasn't even sure like what I wanted to do with the deck, or like where I wanted to go with it. I was just kind of like still looking at cards, and I made something similar to this, where it's like a big, you know, big pile of cards, whereas I just like do like generic things where, you know, I'll go into the deck builder here and type in like discard, obviously do release first. So I would just, you know, look up cards that say discard, cards that say draw, cards that say dragon, and just kind of like look through the card pool and, you know, piece it together, and you know, to get something kind of something like this, just like searching a bunch of cards and looking at them and try to put them together. So obviously didn't play all these cards, so it's easier to make like a big list like this and just kind of like make the deck smaller to size. You have all the cards you're like kind of interested in. Obviously you run like generic cards like Heavy Storm and stuff like that, but you know, you can kind of just like get an idea like what kind of deck you want to build here. And at first, as crazy as it sounds, I wasn't even sure if I wanted to play Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon, because obviously, like, I mean, I guess this was like really early on. But I felt like at first, when you played Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon, you had to play Red Eyes Wyvern, and Red Eyes Wyvern's not really that great until it's like in the graveyard. So it was only good with Future Fusion. It didn't really contribute to the draw engine. So I was kind of a little hesitant on playing Wyvern, which made me hesitant to play Darkness Metal Dragon. But obviously, eventually I came to my senses. Yeah, some other card I was looking at was this card called Serial Spell, which doesn't get played in Dragon Turbo, but it's a really interesting card. It's a quick play spell, and it says activate only when you activate one of your normal spell cards. So just any normal spell card. Discard all cards from your hand to the grave, and this effect becomes that normal spell card. So I was really considering this card early on, because say you have like a handful of dragons and cards of consonants. You can go cards of consonants, discard Whitestone or something like that, and then go Serial Spell, copy the cards of consonants, discard in your hand, and you'll draw 4 cards because you draw 2 cards of consonants, and then 2 off Serial Spell, which seemed pretty good. You dig 4 cards, and but obviously this is only really good in combination while you're draw spells and super rejuve. It would be nice to just work with Pia Avarice or something like that, but it's not really the case. But it was a card I was considering early on. Just kind of got cut, and obviously you play stuff like card destruction and whatnot. So yeah, again, I just use like a giant list like this, and to kind of forge the deck. But honestly, this is the deck list I kind of came up with, and I'll just kind of explain like the card choices and how they came about. So obviously, we talked about the Whitestone Legend, the Blue Eyes, the cards constants, and the trade-ins. Obviously, Debris Dragon kind of fits that cards of consonants requirement. 1,000 attack or less, Dragon Tuner, and draw 2. So obviously wanted to play Debris Dragon because it worked with cards of consonants. And then it was just kind of just figuring out the rest, because you got the 15 cards there, 18 with the Rejuve, 21 with the Upstart Goblins. So that's pretty much half the deck, and it was just kind of filling in the rest. At some point, I was like, oh yeah, you can just go Debris Dragon, bring back a Tuner, or just like a small dragon. You can banish Debris Dragon, banish Whitestone, and summon 2 Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragons. So you didn't really need the Red Eyes Wyvern in the graveyard. Like, this deck is just gonna draw the entire deck, and you get a hand of Debris Dragon and 2 Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragons, and you just build like a giant field. And also you can summon Blue Eyes White Dragons as a big monster. And so that's when I decided to add Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon in. I decided to keep the Red Eyes Wyvern just as a one-of, because it does work with Future Fusion, but yeah, I just felt like maybe one could be okay. It was just kind of like a filler spot at the time. And I also felt like Quackamiyo Drago would be a good fit here as well, because this will help force through your OTK. Stops Battle Fader, Gore, Stragodia, so it just kind of blanks all those cards, and it's also good against just locking out darks and lights in general. So pretty much you can go Debris Dragon, Whitestone, banish both for 2 Red Eyes. Red Eyes 1 can summon Blue Eyes, and the other one can summon Drago. A lot of damage, OTK push. And then for the rest of the monsters, I played White Knight Dragon. Again, I wasn't really sure how many, just kind of testing the deck. I wasn't really sure how many level 8 monsters you would need. Considering you're playing 3 trade-in and 3 Blue Eyes, I was like, maybe you need another, level 8 monster. So I decided to go with White Knight Dragon. Something cool about this card is that, if you have Darkness Metal Drago up, you can special summon White Knight Dragon as like another beater, because it is water, not like light or dark. Whereas, the rest of the monsters kind of have that, they have a tough time being summoned under Drago. And this card wasn't bad either, because, you know, you did have stuff like Gladiator Beast, and Gladiator Beast was a little more popular back then. Well, it's kind of gaining popularity again now, but I thought maybe this was like a decent card to, you know, deal with kind of decks like that. And the guard, kind of similar thing. Guard kind of stuck around more so than White Knight Dragon or just another level 8, but guard's still using deck lists. And again, it's just kind of how you just need to have like more cards of consonance targets, and there wasn't really any like good ones other than, you know, the White Stone and Debris Dragon. And something about guard is that, you know, it's fire, so you can do the same thing, summon it under Drago and make a play or something like that. And then Card Trooper, you mill 3, and at this time I was playing 2 Pot Avarice. I was stuck on 2 Pot Avarice for a long time, but current lists only play 1. You can get away with 1. Sometimes you kind of get stuck, like you kind of get screwed if you Pot Avarice is on your bottom 2 and you're kind of looking for it, because then you can't activate it if you have 1 or less cards in your deck. It is pretty niche, but it does come up more often than you think. But at the time I was playing 2 because I wasn't really sure what the ratio was. I knew 3 was too many. I feel like 1 like probably wasn't enough, so I was with 2. So that was like a deck change later on, cutting it to 1. But I felt Card Trooper was really good for fueling the Pot Avarice, just to get additional draws. It replaces itself when it's destroyed, so that was really good. You know, you can just throw it out there and then it replaces itself, so you're still digging through the deck. And it has some other synergies as well. Obviously it works with Debris Dragon, so you go into like Black Rose Dragon, blow up the field, so I really like that. And as for the other monsters, just like generic defense cards, these are the only 2 defensive cards I played, was Tragodia, which is still played in current lists. Just really good because you can summon it under Future Fusion with Future Fusion on the field. And then Gores. Gores doesn't see as much play in Dragon Turbo lists because it does conflict with Future Fusion. Obviously summoning a really big token in itself is really good. Can help you OTK a lot, and just like getting to level 8 synchro plays like Stardust Dragon and whatnot. But it's not totally necessary. I feel like if it didn't conflict with Future Fusion, then it'll still be good to play, or probably played more often anyways. But both are really good. So yeah, I enjoyed playing both at the time. But later on lists, you can kind of get away with just playing the Tragodia. So yeah, that's kind of it for the monsters. And then card destruction, obviously, this is like one of my favorite cards all time. Again, I played it in like Dark World, so it was really good there. It's really good here. Discarding and drawing, you know, works really good with the Dragon Turbo and Super Rejuve and all that, what you're trying to do. It's one of the best cards on the deck. And this is another one, Magical Stone Excavation. This card's at 2 in this format, but you discard 2 cards, target 1 spell in your grave, add to your hand. So this is kind of like helps put Rejuve all together, and it's a really good toolbox card because you can go Rejuve. This is like a really common play. If you have Rejuve, Magical Stone, and 2 dragons in your opening hand, you can go just like Rejuve for like nothing. Magical Stone, discard 2 dragons, add Super Rejuve back. So then you discard 2 dragons, you're going to draw 2 off the first Rejuve, and then you're going to draw 2 more off the second Rejuve. And again, this is quick play, so if you happen to draw more as you draw through your deck at the end phase, more Rejuves, then you can activate those and draw even more cards. Honestly, this card is just really good. Like, say you have Rejuve, like discarded 2 dragons, and you discard 2 more dragons with Magical Stone. You can draw 8 cards, and it kind of goes on from that. So it's really good for just like doubling up on your Rejuves and just getting through your deck. And this is like one of my favorite cards in the deck, just because it's really good for the toolbox. So you're able to throw away like important cards at the end phase that for hand size, and then Magical Stone can just kind of pick whatever you need for your next turn to, like if you need a Heavy Storm, Pie Avarice, you know, Instant Fusion, whatever you need. It's a really good toolbox card. So that was like another addition. And yeah, so, and then like the last couple cards, it's like Pie Avarice. Again, I was realizing like once you know, it obviously says draw on it, but once you kind of like fly through your deck a little bit, like cards of constants, trade-ins, you know, card destruction, future fusion, once you kind of go through all those cards, and also you have this discarding cards at end phase, I was realizing like, okay, well you need a way to like refuel your deck, and if you ever discard like 1 or 2 Red-Eyes Dark and Smells Dragons, you need to get those back. Debris Dragons, you need to get those back. So I felt like Pie Avarice is needed. And again, I wasn't really sure of the ratio, but I felt like 2 was fine. And again, later on we found out that you just get away with 1. Because opening this card is not great. Yeah, you kind of just want to go through your deck and then have it, rather than opening Pie Avarice itself. Generically, not really ever good to open Pie Avarice in any deck. But yeah, that's where that was. That's kind of like how I felt about that card. And again, Heavy Storm, Giant Trunade, just back row sweepers. Now, later lists kind of cut Trunade or put it in the side and just stuck with Heavy Storm. Because if you do open Giant Trunade and a Heavy Storm, you know, they kind of just brick starting off. Like, Heavy Storm is obviously a great card. But, you know, if you open 2 of them, that means you're only working with 4 cards. So, I mean, kind of hard to piece things together a little bit. If you happen to open both, but both are really good cards. Giant Trunade still sees play in the main deck, but it's kind of just like you always play a Heavy Storm, and then time to time you see Giant Trunade. And this is like the last card, and so pretty much I went through the whole deck, and like it's great. You're like, you know, you have this like cool OTK line with Red-Eyes Darkness, Metal Dragon, and you're just able to, you know, Debris Dragon super easy and get Red-Eyes Darkness, Metal Dragon. And I think the week of this Edison Legends tournament, and I'll pull this actually I'll pull it up right now. So this was the Edison Legends tournament. It was in April of 2021. 123 players, which beforehand there was only like, you'll get Edison tournaments of like 20 people on these online tournaments. But you know, E3 Yu-Gi-Oh! Did a really good job, and Format Library, they did a really good job just, you know, hyping this tournament up and getting a lot of people to play. Honestly, tournaments are a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller than that amount for online tournaments anyways, and maybe in real life IRL tournaments, but currently. But for 2021, that was a really big deal, and a lot of players. And I made top 8, and these were just kind of like the decks that people played and topped with. So it was like one of each deck, which was really cool. And yeah, I managed to get 3rd in this tournament with this deck. So yeah, I just wanted to show that off real quick. But the week of this tournament, and I discovered, or I decided like, this Instant Fusion card was seems to be like something I would want to play, or you know, experiment with. And it kind of just like unlocked the last piece of the main deck anyways, because before that you weren't really getting access to the extra deck very well. Like, sure, you can go Gores or Tragodia synchro with like the level 1 tuners, you have Debris Dragon with Card Trooper, and you know, that's really about it. You can't really do anything with the level 8s in the standard build, so, or Red-Eyes Darkness, Metal Dragon. So I was like, well, Instant Fusion, you know, if I see it, it's good. You can kind of just dig for it so you can find it eventually. So I was looking at Instant Fusion targets, and Dark Fire Dragon is a dark. It's a level 4, or dark doesn't really matter, but it's a dragon and it's level 4. So level 4 opens up some plays. Level 5 synchro plays with the level 1 tuners. Can't really do anything with Debris Dragon, unfortunately, but you can just throw this out there, banish it, the Summon Rise Darkness Metal Dragon, so that can come up. If you don't happen to have a normal summon play, like Wavestone, Debris Dragon, And you can also fetch it back with Magical Stone Excavation, so if it ever hits the graveyard and some reason you're out of normal summons, you can always get this back. So it's kind of like you're playing 3 more monsters. You got Instant Fusion and 2 Magical Stone Excavations. So like again, this is a really good toolbox card, the Magical Stone, and it just kind of acts as 2 more copies of like any spell card in your deck, and then you can just play the 1 Instant Fusion and it counts as that. Now builds later on, like Ghost Rider, he added a 2nd Instant Fusion because it can be really good. It's actually, it can combo with Super Rejuve, because you can go like you can Instant Fusion for Darkfire Dragon, banish it for Red Eyes Darkness Meld to something like Whitestone, a Legend from the grave, and then you can treat Darkness Metal and Whitestone to like summon Blue Eyes or set it, and then that counts as, since Super Rejuice counts dragons discarded and tributed, you're tributing 2 dragons there, so that counts as a Rejuve counts too. Obviously you're taking, you're pretty much spending like 2 or 3 cards to do that, but if you have like a higher Rejuve count, it's probably worth it. Or you just need to get through your deck, because if you're not drawing in this deck, you're probably not really doing a whole lot, so it's probably just better to dig through the deck. So yeah, that's kind of like Darkfire Dragon. And then I also decided to play Musician King as a level 5. And shortly after this, I was playing, Flame Swordsman, but honestly, Elemental Hero Mariner is better because it gets under bottles. Again, pretty niche, but Musician King happens to be light, so again, doesn't really work with Drago on the field. But the reason I was playing Musician King, because it gets you the Tempest Magician, and you can do a first turn play. If you have like Whitestone, Instant Fusion, you can make Tempest Magician and discard some dragons, burn your opponent for like, I don't know, 15, 2,000 life points, and then activate Super Rejuve, and then you're on your way. I think this was kind of cut in later iterations, just because it kind of takes up a lot of space. It's kind of 2 slots that you can play something else with. And you kind of do the same thing with Brionic, where you're discarding dragons and bouncing Super Rejuve. Obviously you're not getting the burn, so like that's the kind of cool thing with Tempest Magician. You can burn. Like if you do like a giant like push, but it's not quite enough, you can Tempest Magician in main phase 2 and burn him for the rest. So kind of like Dark Strike Fighter in a sense. Or if you just happen to have like a lot of cards in hand, you can make Tempest Magician, discard your hand, and then burn him for like 4,000, which again, this is kind of niche, but that was kind of like the mindset there. So that's why I picked Musician King, because it is spellcaster for Tempest Magician. So those were the 2 Instant Fusion targets I played. Also, you have 5-8 Dragon for Future Fusion. So yeah, this deck would ideally you would send 3 Whitestone, a Legends, Quackmere Drago, and then like another dragon, like a White Knight or Wyvern, White Knight, or Guard to the grave, and then you add 2 to 3 Blue Eyes based on how many you can get. And then later on, when you play 2 Instant Fusions, you can play a 2nd Darkfire, you can play level 3 to get into Army Arm, like Dragoness, play Mariner, and then you can also play Ojama Knight, which has some implications as well, because you can revive with Debris Dragon. They all kind of have like their purpose, but these were the first ones I played. So again, this is a rehash Instant Fusion. Again, you can play the way that you outdo block, because that was kind of like the last hurdle, and the way you get to the extra deck is Instant Fusion, because Instant Fusion can go Musician King in level 1 to get you to Brionic. Brionic is obviously really busted. You can spin like set monsters, you can spin dupe frogs if they're in the way, and you can just play through the board. And that was kind of like the problem with the original like Disaster Dragon deck, where it couldn't outdo dupe frogs with the engine. Instant Fusion card is an engine card, and you have a lot of access to it. Obviously, I only played one here, and that was kind of like the main out to it in this deck list. But you just have so much access to it, and it gets you into your extra deck, which is that original Disaster Dragon deck didn't have access to, or good access to anyway. So again, there's the rest of the extra decks is kind of like a bunch of generic synchros that all have their own purpose. I did play the Army Arm because you can go Waystone Legend and Card Trooper, but didn't have room for the level 3 in this current build and the extra deck level 3 fusion target. And the side deck is kind of just relatively similar to what you would see in a current Dragon Turbo list. Played 2 more Quackimir Dragos this coat if I wanted to go into like a stun package post games 2 and 3, like it's a light or dark deck, like kind of like Lightsworn or maybe Vayu Turbo or something along those lines. Again, I wasn't really knowing what to expect going into this tournament, so this is kind of like I was rolling with. And you know, you kind of see his Drago in the side, multiple copies in current list, so that's what I was kind of going for. Aside of the 1 DD Crow, you can side this in current builds. I was like, well, DD Crow is probably decent, and you can just play 1 because you can just dig for it so easily. So if there's some deck that relies on the graveyard really hard, then DD Crow's great. Morphing Jar, obviously draws 5, discards hand, so works good with Rejuve, and you know, the kind of the theme of the deck. But it's kind of like I don't think I ever sided this in. It was just kind of just like it's too you know, you don't really have much control of how Morphing Jar is going to work. It can win you the game or lose you the game. So don't really see it that much in current builds. Lightning Vortex, you see, you know, a couple copies in the standard in the sideboards of Dragon Turbo, pretty much always. Again, discards a card, so it works for Rejuve. And, you know, I guess like just playing with decks like this in the past, like Shadal's, Infernity, Dark World, you have to really prepare for your opponent's sideboard, because they're gonna, you know, decks like these, they're gonna bring in their hate cards like Fossil Dyna, Vanity's Fiend, you know, hand traps and whatnot. So like, I just kind of like knew I had to side Lightning Vortex for those kind of threats. It's also just good at wiping the board, and the generic nature of this deck is like, you know, your opponent's gonna go all out to try to kill you, and you know, if you live with Tragodia Gores, you can just kind of wipe their field and all the resources after that. And it's just generic, you know, field wipe. So, and you can get it back with Magical Stone Excavation. So it's like a lot of synergies with Lightning Vortex. So I kind of just knew to play 2 of those. And again, it's still kind of like a staple in the. I even main decked it at one point. Just the one is it's still really good in the main deck. But yeah, side deck staple always. And these cards don't really see a whole lot of play in the sideboard, but you know, I figured they were too good not to play. Was Brain Control and Mind Control. Probably for like a Disaster Dragon mirror, where you can just take a Red-Eyed Star to smell a dragon and do things with it. But never played against that, so I don't think I ever sided these cards in. And My Body's a Shield obviously works against the fairy deck with Herald, Black Wings with Icarus attack and whatnot, so that's kind of what I sided with these. Yeah, time to time you see 1 in builds in the side deck, so not like the worst card. It's also good against Judgment Dragon too, if that comes up. The MST, again, it's at 1 in this format, so I was like, you might as well bring it in, or have it access to it in the sideboard. Again, I knew I didn't want to main deck it because it's not a sweeper, so the impact of this card is very low, whereas like I'd rather just dig for Heavy Storm or Giant Tornado and blow the opponent out, you know, wipe their, you know, that's kind of like the thing with this deck. You want to play like field sweepers like Lightning Vortex, Heavy Storm, Giant Tornado, and go for your OTK push. You don't need like these 1-for-1, like other decks they play discard traps that go for like 1-for-1 exchanges and whatnot. You can technically play those in Dragon Turbo, but it's not really the game plan you're trying to go for. So I knew like MST being a like low impact card it's not really what you're trying to do with this deck. So that's why I wanted to play one. Obviously, it's good for oppression and stuff, but you know, if your deck's working the way it's supposed to and digging through the deck, you're gonna find Heavy Storm Giant Trinity to out oppression that anyway. So that's MST. 2 Rivalry Warlords. This is kind of before we found out, or they decided that we're gonna rule Warlords differently. Before, like I guess in this tournament, it was ruled that it worked how it does in like current Yu-Gi-Oh, or you know, post Edison, whereas it's like you're kind of stuck with, like, for instance, I wouldn't be able to summon anything other than dragons, but they changed it after this to where you can you know, tree room frog for Caius. So obviously this card just kind of fell off. That and Goes the Match fell off after that. Rule change with the community, but yeah, this was really good against stuff like Quick Draw, or just like synchro based decks, and then against Frog Monarchs, obviously. It was funny, I started this against Quick Draw and Top Cut, and then I was just getting like Fiend Beatdown. Like, he had like Sangan, Snipe Hunter, and Vanity's Fiend. I was like, what is this deck? Anyways, this was a solid card at the time. Honestly, it doesn't see play now because of that rule change. And Royal Decree, obviously, you know, I play many traps, so it kind of makes sense here. And if there's like any trap heavy decks at the time, you can kind of just bring this in and lock them down and, you know, run free. So again, that's kind of just like a really long deck profile of, you know, Dragon Turbo. But I felt like I needed to, you know, explain how I came with the deck, like put the deck together. First glance, like I remember, like, because you know, it was like the pandemic. We didn't really have anything to do. Kind of just stuck at home all the time. So that's kind of how everyone felt for this tournament. So that's why probably so many people played, because they were like, "Ooh, Edison formatting E3 Yu-Gi-Oh!" and was making a lot of videos. So kind of got people excited to play old Yu-Gi-Oh! Again. But I was planning on playing Video Turbo up until like the week of this tournament, and I had made this deck and played against a friend that I met online. His name was Belvedere, I believe. Haven't seen him in a while, but him and I used to test, and I was playing with this deck for fun against him. And again, I just kind of just put it together, like pieced it together like that week, like this guy like figured out. And I was planning on playing Video Turbo in this Edison Legends tournament. He's like, I was just kind of destroying him and testing with Dragon Turbo. And he's like, man, you should play this deck. I was like, I don't know, like, it's not really a deck. I don't know how well it'll do. And it turned out to be do well. I got third of this tournament out of 123 players. And again, these were like the decks that topped that tournament. You had Blackwing, Diva Hero, which is kind of like a new deck. Shout out to Silch's Ruin. Team Ring of Destruction, Gladiator Beast, Quick Draw, Disaster Dragon, Dragon Turbo, Flame Bell, and Diva Frog. So those were the decks that topped that tournament. And it's a little graphic I made for that tournament. But yeah, that was just like something that was really cool. As like, I constructed this deck just based on how I deck build in the past. I love deck building, so it's kind of like, that's like my favorite part of Yu-Gi-Oh! So it was just really cool that I managed to build this deck and top with it. And it's really cool that it's like a lasting deck, like 3.5 years later into Edison format, and it's still kicking and doing well. Obviously it's not everyone's favorite deck, because it is, you know, it can feel good or feel bad for either player at times. But it's something that I liked, because it's kind of like, it has like, I guess it expresses like my deck building into, you know, a deck like this where it's like a really large engine. You have to know how to be very precise with how you side deck with this, because like you can't really take, it's like a whole engine, so you kind of have to like pick like, you can't like just take out a bunch of random cards and be like, okay, let's roll with it, you know. I guess like in the current, like, it's like a generic deck with like a bunch of generic traps. You're like, yeah, you know, I'm not feeling this third D person. Just, you know, take it out, slot something else in there. Like, you have to be very deliberate with how you're siding with this deck, and that's kind of like why I have like such like low ratios for like certain things. Like, I knew with like Lightning Vortex, okay, I don't need 3 because I dig through my deck, and it's easy to find Lightning Vortex because you play so many draw cards. So that was like something I had kept in mind. Like, as long as I'm drawing cards, keep that big draw engine, I can find whatever I need in this deck, and it works out for the most part. So that was like another deck building thing with this. It's like, I don't need like a ton of, I can just have like a bunch of one-ofs and it's easy to find them, more so than other decks. So but yeah, back to the, you know, last closing thoughts with this is just that it's really cool that this is still a deck and people play it and it still does well in tournaments, and it even has like I think it has like 3 like major tournament wins. It has like, I think it has 3 rivet wins and several tops. So it's really cool that it's still kicking. It has like a spot in the meta, and yeah. Anyways, I just wanted to show that off and talk about it. It's something I always wanted to kind of talk about. I just haven't really gotten around to it. But yeah, leave your thoughts about Dragon Turbo down below, and I guess if you like the deck or not. Yeah, thanks for watching, everyone. I'll catch you all in the next one.